This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad and live today. There's an old proverb that says that good fences make good neighbors. Now, while Robert Frost's 1914 poem Mending Wall includes this quote, there is evidence that it was first used in a letter back in 1640, where the author wrote, "A good fence helpeth to keep peace between neighbors." So what this saying means is that when you have a clear boundary between your home and your neighbor's home, and you respect that boundary, it helps to keep the peace. Good relations between neighbors are partly dependent on fences, and thus the phrase mending fences came into being, which would refer to improving or repairing a relationship that has been damaged by an argument or by a disagreement. In our reading from Genesis, Joseph has the perfect opportunity for payback on his older brothers, but he chooses not to. He chooses to mend the fence. Now, the beef all started when these boys were younger, and Joseph's brothers were extremely jealous of the image that Joseph portrayed as he paraded around the house in his luxurious coat, which had sleeves that his father gave to him and only to him. His brothers thought, "Who does this little pipsqueak think he is? Why does he get such a fancy coat?" They couldn't take it anymore, and they threw him in a well, only to fish him out and sell him into slavery to a caravan passing by. Now let's fast forward in time, and Joseph is now 30 years old, finding himself in the good graces of Pharaoh after having interpreted his dreams from prison. Pharaoh, in fact, makes Joseph ruler over all of Egypt. Now, while there's famine in the land of Canaan, where Joseph's from, Egypt, it's doing just fine. So Joseph's brothers travel from their homeland down to Egypt looking for food. Turns out that Joseph recognizes his brothers, but they don't recognize him. This is the perfect opportunity for Joseph to enact his revenge. What goes around comes around. Show them that you are not weak. As the kids like to say these days, time to flex on these haters, Joseph. But he doesn't. In fact, he forgets about all that stuff that took place in the past. He just forgets about it. He lets it go. These are his brothers, his family. He intends to show compassion and love to them and to provide for them. He is going to mend the fence. What could have turned out to be a messy situation ends up being a reunion as the brothers and Joseph reconcile with one another and look forward to the dawn of a new day. Loving your family members and friends and neighbors, that's something that can be expected. I mean, even when things get sour, many times the pathways lead back to mended fences and to resolved issues, much like the story of Joseph turns out. And that's exactly how God would have us behave. God does not want us to fall back on our own egos and self-image for the fear of looking weak and helpless in the eyes of our adversaries. It's actually quite the contrary. God sends Jesus to us so that we might try a new way of doing things and discover how things might pan out if we follow in his ways. In our gospel reading for today, Jesus continues to preach to a crowd of people gathered together in a flat field, what we call the Sermon on the Plain. And boy, oh boy, does he have some words of wisdom for them to chew on. He says, "Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you." I definitely can see some people responding to this by saying, "Hold on a minute, Jesus. I mean, whatever happened to an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth? I mean, that sounds better to me. If I'm going to suffer, then someone else is going to suffer as well. That only seems fair." To which Jesus would say, "Nope, we're not going to roll that way. This is the new way, the new style. If you follow me, you will treat your enemies the same way that you might treat your own family, with respect, love, and compassion." My guess is that more than a few people probably stood up after hearing this and said, "No, thank you, I'm out," never to return to Jesus again. Jesus then probably lost a few more of his listeners when he continued with his sermon, saying, "If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other cheek. And if someone takes your coat, don't hesitate to give your shirt." Again, this is a big ask. The fact of the matter is that we have a hard time looking weak and helpless and vulnerable. Aiding an enemy, forgiving someone who has wronged you, showing compassion when the recipe calls for revenge, these all seem to be moves that can be lumped into this weak and helpless and vulnerable category. But as we've seen with the Joseph story, this is not the case. I mean, true reconciliation takes place, transformation occurs, past grievances are buried and they're forgotten, fences are mended, lives are changed for the better. What might have looked like a weak move by Joseph in the beginning turned out to be the strongest move that he could have made and the most beneficial for all parties involved. Weak, helpless, and vulnerable. Now, while we try to avoid it at all costs, we cannot escape witnessing these descriptors at the crucifixion. I mean, can anything be weaker than hanging helplessly on a cross? I mean, that is absolutely pathetic. What kind of king would choose to not put up a fight, to not defend himself, and to allow himself to be thrust into such a precarious position? I mean, it's ridiculous. Jesus, if you are the Son of God, save yourself and us. And yet that's exactly what Jesus does. Jesus, in his greatest moment of weakness and helplessness and vulnerability, he flips the script on the story and he says, no, it's not going to be this way. Death will not have the final say. We're not going to take it anymore. The devil loses once and for all. Jesus in his resurrection demonstrates the power of God's love for his people. His dedication to us is radical in that we don't have to do a single thing to share in this victory. Not a thing. Just believe. Doesn't matter who you are or what you've done or how you've disobeyed God. He doesn't care about those details. God's radical love is for everyone who wishes to receive it. And it is the same radical love that comes with zero conditions that Jesus wants us to share with others. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. Just imagine if we all subscribed to this way of thinking, how different our world would truly be. Imagine if we were all moved by the Spirit to share ourselves with others in totally surprising and unexpected ways. Loving our enemies and mending fences with our neighbors. Wow, what a world that would be. Amen. Remember as you go about your day that yesterday is gone. Tomorrow does not yet belong to you. So why not live today, knowing that you never walk alone? We will see y'all next week. Later.